This is Your Life, episode 57.
This is your life. Are you who you wanna be? This is your life. Are you who you wanna be? This is your life. Is it everything you dreamed it would be when the world was younger and you had everything to lose?
Hello and welcome to this episode of This is Your Life. My name is Michael Hyatt, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership. My goal is to help you live with more passion, work with greater focus, and lead with extraordinary influence. In this episode, I'll be talking about why you must confront seemingly indispensable but disrespectful team members. Look, this is never easy, but it's essential if you're going to create a healthy organizational culture, one that drives the outcomes you're after. And in a moment, I'll share with you 5 principles I've learned the hard way in these types of potentially volatile situations, and I'll also answer some really insightful questions from my listeners. For example, Michael asked, what do you do when the team member is related to the boss? Great question. Tom asked, what do you do if the team member is a volunteer? And Quinn asked, how do you get over the fear of confrontation? Well, we'll get to all this and more in just a minute, but first, this podcast is brought to you by Platform University, an online membership site for helping you launch your personal platform or take it to the next level. And you can find out more at platformuniversity.com. If you're already a member, be sure and check out the new masterclass with Dave Ramsey that we posted earlier this week. As you may know, Dave is the host of the uber-popular Dave Ramsey Show. He's a multi-New York Times bestselling author, and he happens to be my friend. And we talk about how to use books to build your brand in the marketplace. And we've got a great story of collaborating together on the Total Money Makeover. But this has direct application to every platform builder. I don't care where you are, large or small. This is a killer interview that will give you some content that'll be essential in building your own platform. So again, check us out at platformuniversity.com. Alrighty, so why you must confront seemingly indispensable but disrespectful team members. As a leader, what do you do when you have an employee or a colleague who disrespects you in front of your team? What do you do when this employee is a top performer and one of your supervisor's favorites? Well, this is a difficult situation to say the least, and one that almost every leader eventually finds himself confronting. And these are the moments that define your leadership. Well, during the 2010 season, the Tennessee Titans football team lost to the Washington Redskins in overtime. And I promise you, I don't talk about sports much because I don't know much about sports and I don't follow sports. But this incident had such a powerful leadership lesson embedded in it, I had to explore it. Well, it seems that Vince Young, the starting quarterback for the Titans at the time, was injured in the third quarter. And angry about it, he tossed his jersey and his shoulder pads into the stands and he left the field. Well, things really got ugly in the locker room. The Tennessean, our local paper, reported that Young was cussing under his breath as Coach Fisher began speaking to the team. Fisher asked Young to be quiet. Then, according to the Tennessean, quote, Young finished dressing and started to leave. Fisher told Young to stop, saying, don't run out on your teammates. Young then told Fisher, I'm not running out on my teammates. I'm running out on you, end quote. Well, as it turns out, Young had to have surgery on his thumb, which ended the season early for him. But regardless, Coach Fisher had already determined that Young would lose his starting position to rookie Rusty Smith. And this is where it gets interesting. Bud Adams, who's the owner of the Titans, publicly said the two men, Fisher and Young, better find a way to get along. In other words, he didn't back his own head coach. And this put Fisher in a really tough spot. And as you may know, Adams and Fisher ultimately parted company, and it's too bad. I really liked Fisher. But I don't know about you, but I've been in similar situations like this a few times, and perhaps you have too. Maybe you have an employee who is disrespectful, perhaps even belligerent, like Vince Young was, but he's a top performer. Your boss or your boss's boss has put up with his antics because he's not sure the organization can win without him, and you're caught in the middle. What do you do? Well, here are 5 actions you must take if you're going to retain credibility with your team and continue to be an effective leader. Action number 1, get clear in your own thinking. Did the employee cross the line this time or not? Is this worth putting your job on the line? In this particular example, I would say yes with Coach Fisher and Vince. The integrity of Coach Fisher's leadership and the discipline of the entire team was at stake. This doesn't mean you have to be rash or make an immediate decision when this happens, but you can't wait too long either. You've got to take some time to reflect, step out of the meeting if you have to, consult with a trusted advisor, but get clear and don't dawdle. Action number 2, count the cost. To confront this kind of situation effectively, you've got to be willing to put your own well-being at risk. This is a bet your job kind of moment most often. And thankfully, these don't happen frequently, but every leader will inevitably face situations that test their resolve and courage. And there's going to be a cost either way. You might as well pick your poison. But I remember one situation like this in my own life. It happened several years ago. My division missed its numbers for the month. And as usual, I emailed my financial report to my boss, along with my commentary on what had happened. And I reported the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I always did. And I also copied my direct reports. I wanted them to hear the same story I was giving my boss, so we were all singing out of the same hymnal, so to speak. And I did this every month. It was just a way of keeping us all aligned. Well, because we missed our numbers, my boss at the time went ballistic. He replied back in anger, challenging my competence as a leader and threatening that it couldn't happen again or else. Well, it was very disconcerting to say the least. And by the way, this is never, ever something you should do via email. I mean, it was bad leadership on his part. If you've got something negative to say to someone or a critique, say it face-to-face if possible. On the phone is your second choice, but never in an email. It's just not good to document it. It's not good to express yourself when you don't have the advantage of the other communication mechanisms like your facial expressions, your body language, all the rest. Well, regardless, he replied to everyone, including my direct reports in his tirade. And I felt, honestly, eviscerated, I just like to say that word, and completely disrespected. And I fortunately resisted the temptation to reply in kind. Believe me, I wanted to. But instead, I took a walk around the block and I tried to regain my composure. And I called Gail and I told her what happened. And she encouraged me to do whatever I thought was right. And we'd live with the consequences. You got to love a woman like that. Well, I picked up the phone and I called him. And I would have done it again in person, but he was on the road traveling and I felt like it had to be dealt with then. Honestly, I wanted to throw up. I was visibly shaken. I was scared. I was frightened, but I knew I had to lean into this and call him on it. Well, when he picked up the phone, here's what I said. I said something to the effect of, your email was totally inappropriate. I have no problem with you telling me whatever you want to tell me in private, but you did it in public by copying my direct reports. It was humiliating and disrespectful. And then I said, look, you can fire me if you want, but if you ever speak to me this way again in public, I will quit on the spot. I'm not going to put up with this kind of behavior. I can't lead in an environment where I don't have your support. Well, he was very embarrassed and immediately apologized to me, and he asked me what he could do to fix it. And I told him I wanted him to apologize to me and copy the same people. I didn't expect him to wallow in it, but he needed to be clear, not only for me, but for his own leadership and for the good of the team. You know what? He did it, and it was completely resolved, and we went on to have a very productive working relationship. But it took me stepping into the middle of that. And again, this doesn't happen often, but there are opportunities or there are times when you're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to kind of put the cards on the table, be direct, and call someone on misbehavior. Action number 3, secure your supervisor's support. Now, again, I'm thinking back like the situation where Coach Fisher, where you have a disrespectful employee whom the boss likes, as was clearly the case in Coach Fisher's situation. Perhaps the person in question is a high performer. He just doesn't get the culture. He doesn't play well with others. But before you confront him, you need to explain to your boss what's at stake. Talk about the importance of culture, team morale, the impact on the results, which of course is going to be critical to him. But be calm and reasonable. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to get excitable, but outline how you're going to confront the employee. Emphasize that you're going to try to resolve the situation peacefully. But if you can't, you will terminate the employee for the good of the team. You must then ask for your supervisor's support, and you've got to be direct. If you can't get his support, you've got to resign. You can't lead effectively in this situation. And I once had to do this with an author. Actually, 3 different authors on 3 separate occasions who were disrespecting my team. And in this one particular case, unfortunately, he was a best-selling author and there was a lot of money on the line. And I'll tell you that story another time, but it wasn't easy. And for several days, my boss refused to make a decision. And I finally had to go to him and say, look, either he goes or I go. It's that simple. And he relented. Action number 4, confront the disrespectful employee. Now, assuming you have your supervisor's support, you've got to sit down and calmly talk to the employee. Explain that you don't mind disagreements, but you cannot and will not tolerate disrespectful behavior. There are no exceptions and no excuses. Be clear that the employee has 2 options. He can apologize to you and to everyone who witnessed the behavior, or you'll terminate him for cause. It's that simple. And by the way, I'm not pretending these are easy conversations. They aren't. Believe me, I know. But these are the kinds of situations that define your leadership. And either way, whether you chicken out and let the behavior slide or confront it head on, it will affect your reputation with your team, with your boss, and really with yourself. Action number 5, give him some time to think about it. I would further explain that you want him to take the next 24 hours to think about it. Affirm him. For example, Coach Fisher in the same situation could have said, I have no idea what he did say, but he could have said, Vince, you're an enormously talented player. You're a hero to thousands of people. Everyone is watching, including your family and teammates. This is an opportunity for you to take your leadership to the next level. It's a defining moment. There's more at stake here than you may realize. I'm praying that you make the right decision. I want you on the team. I would then tell him exactly when I expect to hear from him, turn around and walk away. And whatever you do, follow through. Don't make that an idle threat. You're expecting an answer. He's either on the team or he's off the team, but you want him to come to a decision. You know, this is the tough stuff of leadership that no one wants to discuss, but it's the necessary stuff, and you inevitably confront it if you're trying to build a healthy organizational culture. They're just people that are not contributing toward that because of their behavior, and culture is ultimately shaped by the behavior of the leaders. And you can't develop people, and you can't take them to the next level unless you're willing to speak into their lives and be courageous in doing it for their benefit and for the benefit of your team. So with that, let's go to some listener questions. And the first one comes from Christy.
Hi, Michael. This is Christy Tennant-Crispin of Algumwood Consulting, and our blog is algumwood.com. I work a lot internationally, and I've found that what's acceptable in one culture may be considered disrespectful in another. In an increasingly global professional world, what is your advice for someone working in a situation where colleagues may not even realize that what they're doing or saying is being perceived as disrespectful? Thanks so much, and I look forward to your response.
Christy, this is a great question. I'm not sure, frankly, I've got enough experience to really speak to it authoritatively, but let me just tell you what I know. When we opened our office in Brazil from Thomas Nelson, I was kind of coached by somebody who just said, look, here are some things, gestures, mannerisms, other things that would be disrespectful in this environment. So be careful to be respectful of the Brazilians when you're there. And I don't even remember what those things were now. It was several years ago. But I think it is incumbent upon us when we go into other cultures to learn that culture and to be respectful of it. I mean, that's just, simple courtesy to me. And I think likewise, if somebody comes in from another culture and they're doing something that's offensive, probably it's not because they're malicious. They just don't know any better. And probably some gracious private coaching would be worthwhile. Now, if it's with the team members, it's probably worth talking it out and to try to make it objective and not make it personal, but to try to just talk it through so that everybody has a better understanding of the other one's culture so that they're respectful of it. So that's all I know to suggest. But great question. The next question comes from Joe.
Michael, this is Joe Consford, and I blog and podcast at missionaryonfire.com. I was wondering, what is the best way to handle a situation where a coworker is being disrespectful, but the team leader does not recognize the situation yet? What is your advice in that particular circumstance? Thank you very much.
Joe, let me suggest a couple of things. Number one, make sure that you're modeling the behavior that you're really asking him to exhibit. For example, I was in an environment one time where everybody was disrespectful to the boss behind his back. They would just say negative things, laugh at him, make fun of him. And I just decided that it just didn't seem right that I was letting him write me a check because I was on his payroll, and yet I was laughing behind his back. So I just purposed I wasn't going to do that anymore. And so if the conversation came up about the boss, if something was said negative, I just ignored it. So I want to make sure, and I want you to make sure, that your example is above reproach. Second thing I would suggest is go talk with that person directly. Before you bring it up to the boss, give that other person a chance to remediate their behavior. So go talk to them and say, look, maybe I'm misunderstanding things here, but here's how it looks to me. And, frankly, I find it offensive, but call them out on it. If it doesn't work then I would go to the boss and I would just explain, again, for the good of the team, because that kind of culture is absolutely toxic. I know in Dave Ramsey's offices that gossip, for example, is a fireable offense. So if you're gossiping, you're going to get yourself fired. And I think disrespect is a similar thing. I want to build personally a culture of honor where people are respectful of one another. Things just go better then when you give one another the benefit of the doubt. You don't speak ill of them behind their back, and you're always speaking in a respectful tone about them. So I would follow those 3 steps. Make sure you're practicing it, go to the person in question, and if necessary, go to the boss for the sake of the culture and the larger cause. Hope that's helpful. Next question comes from Quinn.
Hi, Michael. This is Quinn Peterson. I encourage intentional commuting at biketoworkblog.com. Now, Michael, I don't consider myself to be a coward, but these kinds of conversations really intimidate me, and I can't figure out why. Do you have any suggestions for identifying what might be causing this fear of having these hard conversations? Thanks for taking my question.
Quinn, this is such a good question, and congratulations, you're normal. I think these intimidate all of us because none of us want to hurt someone else intentionally or step into a situation where we might get hurt. And so we avoid these things. And I'm just like anybody else. I'm not courageous by virtue of not having fear in my life. I'm courageous by virtue of the fact that I step into these situations. And I've learned over time that not stepping into them ultimately is worse than stepping into them. So I wouldn't beat yourself up. And I certainly don't know where this is coming from. Maybe it's just because you're human and that's normal. But I think what you've got to get to is you've got to get the focus off you and onto the person and onto the team. And that's where it shifted for me, is realizing that what I have to say for that person's benefit matters. It matters for their development as a human being. It matters for their development as a leader. But they can't continue to be disrespectful and build a team that's effective. Just impossible. It will not happen. So what I have to say matters. Second thing is, I really believe they can handle it. I think sometimes we see people way too small than they actually are. And I think we need to see them as someone who's got the capacity to handle it, who will benefit from getting this kind of helpful criticism and will take their life to the next level. And then the third thing that I try to think of is that I'm going to stand for their greatness. In other words, I don't want to just, be dismissive or think of them too small, but I want to stand for their greatness, and it may take this confrontation to get them to the next level. So again, getting the focus off of you and onto them and how you can be a catalytic change agent to make that happen for them, I think that's helpful. The next question comes from Michael.
Hi, Michael. This is Michael, and I serve as an executive leader in an organization in the North Houston area. I'm tasked with keeping departmental heads focused on accomplishing goals as a team and promoting our vision across a team platform within our organization. I blog at Mokester on Life. My question is, how do you confront and deal with seemingly indispensable, yet at times disrespectful team members when those team members are the daughter or spouse of a boss, or maybe even a cousin or a family member to me, and most of them are older than I am? What advice would you give me on approaching those kind of confrontational moments without breaking down the elements of the team and keeping the goals and the perspectives of the organization in mind? And I appreciate your thoughts.
Well, Michael, let me just be clear up front. You still have to do it. you don't get a pass. I know you're not asking for this, but you don't get a pass just because the person in question is related to the boss or is a family member. In fact, I would say it becomes even more necessary because people are going to judge that family member by a higher standard than they do everybody else because they're looking for slippage. They're looking for bad behavior, and you've got to be willing to step in there for the boss's sake and for the organization's sake to make sure that, they're kind of upholding their end of the bargain. So I realize it makes it more difficult. I know that it's probably got more risk or feels like it does, but I can tell you from somebody who employs family in my own business that if one of my daughters, for example, who's working for me, and girls, you know who you are if you're listening to this, if they're working for me and they're doing something that I would like to know about, but for some reason I haven't seen, I want somebody to come tell me. That's important. I'm going to be grateful for that. And, if you're in an environment where the person that you're telling that, the big boss who doesn't want to hear about his family member who's being disrespectful or acting unethically or something else, if you're in an environment like that, do you really want to be in that kind of environment? I would be making an exit strategy now. So confront it. That's what I would suggest first. See if you can make it work for the good of everybody involved. The last question comes from Tom.
Hi, Michael. My name is Tom Skilling, and I am a pastor in Eastern North Carolina. I blog at tomskillinglive.com, where I write about the Christian life and leadership. My question for you is, how would you recommend confronting team members when they are unpaid volunteers? The church and nonprofits in general rely heavily on our volunteer base to accomplish our mission, and it can be challenging to hold volunteers to the same standard as our paid coworkers. Thanks, Michael.
Tom, I know it feels like this, but it's not really true. Let me see if I can explain it this way. I think everybody wants to be part of a team that's got high standards. And just because you're volunteering doesn't mean that you, as a volunteer, lower your standards, that you're willing to put up with sloppiness and disrespect and everything else. No, I think people want to be part of something that has a higher standard, and because they like to think of themselves as high standard people. So if you've got a volunteer who is ruining it for everyone else, you've got to confront that person for the sake of all the other volunteers who are playing by the rules, who are upholding the standards, who are committed to the organization's mission, etc. For their sake, for the sake of the organization's mission, you have to confront that person. And I'll never forget something I heard years ago. I think it was Dr. Dobson who said this, that he who needs the other person the least is in control of the relationship. And if you put yourself in a situation, even with a volunteer, where you need them more than they need you, suddenly they're in control of the relationship. And some people will abuse that. So I think you have to establish the standard, you have to be disciplined about maintaining it, and you have to call it out. And again, I'm not talking about some kind of legalistic, overbearing kind of thing, but I'm just saying that when people are exhibiting bad behavior, particularly disrespectful behavior, you've got to call it out. You really don't have a choice for the good of the organization. Hope that helps. So that's all the time we have for questions in this episode, but how do you handle situations like this? What have you done in the past? More importantly, what will you do next time it happens? To comment in this episode, go to my blog at michaelhyatt.com/57 is in episode 57, michaelhyatt.com/57. Couple of announcements as we wrap up here. If you're considering launching your own platform, you need to start with a self-hosted WordPress blog. This is not as complicated as it sounds. In fact, I've put together a step-by-step screencast on exactly how to do it. You don't need any technical knowledge. I walk you through the entire process in exactly 20 minutes. And the screencast is absolutely free. And you can find it at michaelhyatt.com/WordPress setup. All one word, WordPress setup. Second announcement, the launch conference for this fall is continuing to fill up. If you don't know, this is the conference for professional speakers or those who want to be, and it's all about the business of public speaking. We do the SCORE conference as well, which is about the art of preparing and delivering powerful, compelling speeches. This, though, is about the business side of public speaking. And specifically, we teach you a powerful 4-part framework that enables you to discover your assets, design your products, develop your market, and determine your value. And this is the conference that launched me into my professional speaking career. But we'll be holding the conference on September 16 through 19 in beautiful Vail, Colorado. Terrific time of year. This is one conference that will pay for itself almost immediately, and you can find out more at launchconference.tv. Launchconference.tv. Finally, my next podcast will be on the topic of how to create more mental focus. Who doesn't need that? I'll share 10 tactics I use to be more productive and more effective. And if you have a question about this topic, please leave me a voicemail at michaelhyatt.com/podcast question. This is a terrific way to cross-promote your blog or website because I'll link to it just as I did with the callers in this episode. Well, that's it for this episode of This Is Your Life. If you've enjoyed this podcast, and this is a little bit different on this episode, let me encourage you to show the love by going to michaelhyatt.com/love and tweeting a link to the show. I'd be so grateful if you do that. It's kind of an experiment to see if we can get the listenership a little bigger than it has been. So go to michaelhyatt.com/love. It'll pre-populate a tweet, and you'll be able to tweet out a link to the show, and I'd be grateful if you do that. If you'd like to comment in this episode, please go to michaelhyatt.com, slide down to the show notes, and you can leave a comment in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you, whatever you have, a comment, a question, or whatever. But until next time, remember, your life is a gift. Now go make it count.
This is your